Greetings, good afternoon. For those of you who celebrate and partake, happy Turkey Day. For the rest of us, what up? How y'all doing? My name is Thandisizwe Chimurenga, and this is Root Work on the Black Liberation Media platform. Please like, subscribe, share. Like, subscribe, share. I'm going to keep saying it. Like, subscribe, share. Like the show now before you hear something you don't like later or before you get caught up and forget. Like it now. Root Work on YouTube, Root Work on the Black Liberation Media podcast. So today, want to have a conversation with my brother, my comrade, my colleague, Jon Jeter, kind of piggybacking, somebody told me about veggie backing, off of a conversation we started last week when I had him on the local show, which airs on KPFK Radio Pacific in Los Angeles. Wanted to give more time to his newest book, Class War in America, how the elites, I'm going to mess up the actual title, but we'll get to that in a moment. How the elites make you put forth the question, are you a worker or are you white? It raised a lot of interesting points, I thought, for myself, and that I thought the Black Liberation Media audience would appreciate. So, without further ado, actually, let me see, because I'm going to get into this, and I might not have time to get over here to the comments. So let me do this now. Thank you, James, for sharing. I hope you're not the only one. You're the only one that mentioned that you shared. The rest of y'all better get in line now. Hey, Sith Lord Prince, how y'all doing? All right. So without further ado, let me go on and bring my brother up here onto the stage, Jon Jeter. And let's talk about this book. Let's talk about this book. Let's talk about the issues raised in the book. Hold on one second. Here we go. Jon Jeter is a published book author, two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist with more than 20 years of journalistic experience. He is a former Washington Post bureau chief and award-winning foreign correspondent on 2 continents, as well as a former radio and television producer for Chicago Public Media's This American Life. I might also add he's also been on and currently is on WPFW, Washington, D.C.'s affiliate Pacifica station. He is a Knight Fellowship recipient, Stanford University's highest professional journalism award, as well as the author of Flat Broke in the Free Market, 2009, co-author of A Day Late and A Dollar Short, 2010. And again, we have his newest book, Class War in America. Thank you so much, Jon, for coming back on Root Work today.
It is my pleasure. We don't talk enough, but every time we talk, it is my pleasure.
Yeah, we definitely don't talk enough. I enjoy hanging out with you. In addition to that official bio of you, you're also a rabble rouser, which is, of course, why we're friends.
Right.
Just friends with any old
game, recognized game.
Okay, just any old regular journalist.
Right.
That's my stealer. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, all the things that you mentioned in my resume were in my pre-rabble rousing days.
Oh, okay, that's behind you now. The respectability is behind you now?
I think so. Wow.
Okay. All right.
I'm a muckraker, as are you.
Okay. Cool.
Somebody got to rake them up, so let's do it.
Let's see who else we got here. Greetings, Lisa. Greetings, Mac Clubbin. Y'all come on in. And like I said, I'm going to hopefully get to the comments if you have some questions or comments for our guest today. As long as y'all act right, don't make me throw you in the trash, don't make me ban you, we'll be all good.
Hopefully I don't inspire that kind of enmity from your audience.
I'm sorry?
I said, hopefully I won't inspire that kind of enmity from your audience.
No, it's just, every now and then you get a stray that walks in.
Right.
You open up to the public, anybody wanders in. So you got to let them know real quick. Get the hell out of here.
Right. Want to take pot shots at me. I'll tell my Bernie Mac, I ain't scared.
Okay. You don't be coming up in here. But anyway. All right. So like I keep saying, let's get down to this. So the question I wanted to ask you first, before we get to everything I want to get to, you state that a foundational class analysis and a foundational racial analysis are integral to understanding the precipice upon which the Republic, i.e. the United States of America, stands nearly a quarter of a way through the 21st century. The question I meant to ask you last week, but we didn't have enough time. I need to know, and let's put it out there, who is the working class in the United States of America? Now, as you know, the Black nationalist movement in particular is enamored with Baba Amilcar Cabral, one of the leaders, if not the leader, of the national liberation struggle in Guinea-Bissau. Cabral set out to survey the whole of Guinea-Bissau, and the peasants of the country were heavily relied upon as it was a war against colonialism and for national liberation. Who exactly is the working class? Who are these people that we're talking about? Who comprises this lofty title that we continuously put out there? You and I last week, we talked about the Occupy movement, the 99% versus the 1%. Who are you when we talk about, especially when we consider the fact that the United States is no longer a manufacturing powerhouse?
Yeah.
Or is it a manufacturing powerhouse in terms of Hollywood, tech, and information? We can get into that too.
Yes. Great questions.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I've been pondering it since you raised it after we talked last week. It's a question, honestly, they say hindsight is 20/20. I should have answered it in the book in explicit terms. I think I did indirectly. But the classical definition of the working class, both Adam Smith and Karl Marx would agree, is anyone who draws a paycheck for a living, right? So it would be the 99%. I think, though, that the book and really the 450 pages that I wrote are devoted to redefining the working class as we define it here in the United States, a country that really has been riven by racism, and very intentionally so. So I think, and I haven't done the research on this, but I think just common sense and sort of quotidian conversations with people of all races would tell you that most people in this country racialize the definition of a working class. So I think the most, first of all, I think most people would refer to themselves as middle class, not working class, which is by design. It is by the design of the elites to almost erase this notion of a working class. Because if you think of yourself as a worker, almost by default, you think of yourself at war with the oligarchs, with the 1%, with the investors, with the stock class, right? Sweat class versus the stock class. And that's what we see all over the world. I lived in Argentina for almost 2 years as a correspondent for the Post. And one thing that struck me in this country that is 97% white, that frankly, that seems too low, but they're 97% white, mostly Catholic. Most of them are from Italy, and then a blend maybe of a lot of Syrians and Germans and other races there, Italians mostly. But they don't, the typical Argentinian does not think of himself as white. I actually got into conflict with a friend of mine. When I would joke with her, I would call her a white girl. And she would get very angry about it, really angry about that, because she associates white with an American woman. But what you would see on Friends, she thought of herself as a revolutionary, right? As an Argentine, as someone who was down to fight the La Clase Alta, right? Which is a popular phrase you'll hear all over Latin America, which refers to the 1%, the wealthy. And so they have a very different vision, which is not to say there's no racism. There is racism in Argentina and everywhere else, particularly Latin America. Some of it is Black probably as much as it is Black, it is aimed at the indigenous population. But the idea of the working class is eclipsed, I think you would say, by racial identity. You mentioned Amilcar Cabral, who, of course, famously said, I quoted him in my first book, Black Broke in the Free Market. I quoted him saying that differences of class eclipse differences of tribe. See, I think most Americans, Black and white, but particularly white, they'd have no notion, they'd have no understanding of that phrase, right? They think of themselves. I think there's a tendency, a default position in America by especially whites, but also I think many Blacks, as we saw in the last election, they think of the working class as the middle class, and they think of Blacks and to a lesser extent Latinos and other races, other people of color, as a sort of pathologized. That's what it means to racialize people, right? It's to pathologize them. And so this idea of the working class is very much corrupted by the idea of race. And so it's a very good question. I wish I had thought to answer it before I finished the book. But I would have to say that I think there are two differences. There's a real version, a real definition, which is anyone who draws a paycheck for a living. And then there's a sort of a social reality that's here in the United States and in other countries as well. But it's really very much a fact of life here in the United States, where we see the working class as largely white and Blacks and other groups of color as a pathological group, not quite workers, people who are sponging off society, people who don't contribute to society. And so that hence is the subject of the book, that war between a white working class and racialized groups who they see as not their equals. Or maybe the better way to put it is most of the white working class in the United States sees Blacks in particular, but also other people of color, as much of a problem, or maybe more of a problem, as they do the elites, the bosses, their employers.
Well, when you say the classical Marxian, I was under the impression that this revolved around the relationship to not only the means of production, but also the actual producing. So there's those who draw paychecks, but then there are those who also draw, there are also those who create the wealth, those who have to sell themselves for a wage, which we all do. But within that, what is their relationship to the wealth that's created? There can be those who actually labor and create things, and then those who manage things, and then those who own the means of production and distribution, and not only acquire all of the wealth, but they are the ones who dole it out in the form of wages and paychecks to everyone else.
Yeah.
I know that one of the things that the new African communists talk about is the working class, or should I say the myth of a white working class. That's one of the books, one of the texts actually, the myth of the white working class, and that oppressed nations, i.e. Black folks or new Africans, Puerto Ricans, Chicano, Mexicano folks, other quote unquote national minorities, are the actual proletarians in this society, which is actually an empire, right? The downtrodden, the objective enemies of capitalism. Yeah. Are these the people, the working class? Even Dr. Gerald Horne talks about this lingering contradiction between the settlers and the colonized people. So,
it's real. That's a great question. It's really a matter of tomato and tomato. So you could replace, for instance, in my book, for the most part, but you could replace the word white with the managerial class, right? I write about this system since the end of the Civil War. There has been, Fred Hampton says it's a class war, right? But since the end of the Civil War, the class war, or since the end of radical Reconstruction, certainly those first 20 years or so after the Civil War, the class war has pitted. It has been this struggle between racial capitalism, right, and racial democracy. We see periods of time where we have a racial democracy. People typically talk about racial democracy in terms of Brazil because they have a very mixed, miscegenated population, but it's not. It never has been. We have at times had something close to resembling a racial democracy where Blacks actually participate in public life and public policy, and we move forward during those times. We modernize the country. Reconstruction era is one of them, where Blacks were the freedmen were obsessed with public education for everyone's children. The Freedmen's Bureau, the bureaucrats would ask, "Well, we can't have education just for Black people." And they said, "We don't mean just for Black people. We mean for your white people too, right?" They were already thinking in universal terms, and the former Confederate states, the former Confederates, were consumed with this idea of loyalty oaths. Do we have to, renounce the Confederacy and the freedmen were like, we don't care anything about that. We're trying to move forward. So we did. We moved forward because Blacks insisted on this idea. The freedmen insisted on this idea, and unfortunately, it was just Black men who were voting at the time. But we still insisted on this idea of public education for everyone because we understood what that would do for the community and what that would do for posterity. Again, during the New Deal, you have Blacks unions that were segregated. Blacks were always chirping at the whites, "Please let us in these unions. We can fight together." Because before that moment, basically from the end of the Knights of Labor. Knights of Labor. Thank you. When that ended, which was segregated unions, but they fought together. They worked together. When that ended, roughly 1890s, basically. The unions were segregated, and so the owners, the bosses, would just pit one union against the other. When the whites went on strike, they just hired the Blacks, a little bit less money, but they hired them to do the work, and vice versa. Blacks were always saying, "Look, man, we're going to take this work because we got kids to feed. But if you let us in your union, we can work together and we can win." And whites mostly did not listen to that until the Great Depression. And Harry Bridges was white and Australian, probably had a different sense of race and what race meant. And a Wobbly, belonged to the Wobblies and probably a communist, went to all the
Wobblies are the International Workers of the World.
Workers of the World, that's right, yeah. And he went to all the churches in the Black churches in the Bay Area in 1934. The dock workers were having a strike. And he told them, he said, "Look, if you respect our strike, when this strike is over, you will be full members of the union, right? And you'll have all the rights and privileges." And the Blacks, frankly, had no reason to believe that, but they did. And that strike was successful, and it became the template for labor organizing. The Congress of Industrial Organizations formed the next year, and their expressed intent was to integrate the unions, and they moved forward. And for a period of really 40 years, that was the template of labor organizing. There was still lots of racism in the unions, but still the idea of Black and white workers working together, collaborating in organized labor, moved the country forward. And so by the early 50s, right after World War II, labor, workers, wages accounted for more than 50%, more than half of all wages. That still is the high watermark, even though that was sustained for mostly the better part of 20 years or so. The idea of a managerial professional class, right? Or if you will, a buffer class. That's what whites are. Whites become a buffer. And the way that the oligarchs, the 1%, have survived, the way that they've beaten us to a pulp, right? The working class, all of the working class, but particularly Blacks, is they have managed over the years, over the decades, they have managed to absorb one tribe after another into their orbit, which is not to say that everybody is rich, but they believe that they can possibly be rich if they turn against particularly Blacks, because we are, and we've always been since the end of slavery, and even before the end of slavery, we've been the vanguard of the revolution, right? We are the most progressive Bloc in the country. That's still true today. We have the most progressive ideas. And frankly, most of the time, our ideas have been universal. And so what they've done is, so one of the things I read about in the book, one of the chapters that's really sort of integral to the strategy deployed by the oligarchs is, I read about it's 1894, I believe, there's a strike on the docks in New Orleans. And New Orleans at that time there were a lot of immigrants from Germany, from Italy, who had come over. Some of them were first generation. They didn't really have a notion of race, certainly not in an institutional way. And so when the strike happened on the docks, it was actually a general strike in New Orleans, and the ship owners came to the whites who had not formed an idea of themselves, who had not formed a white identity. They came to them and said, look, we'll give you what you want, but we won't give these M-words. We're not going to work with them. And these dock workers, who were nominally white in our parlance here in the United States, looked at them like they were crazy. What do you mean you're not going to give it to them? We all work the same docks. Of course you're going to give it to them. And so they won the strike for the most part. And that ethos in New Orleans on the docks lasted for another 20 years until this racial identity set in. This sort of using the mass media, particularly, and the schools and the academy to inculcate this idea of whiteness and a white identity is what happened to these, Italian and Hungarian and Irish dock workers and the white polity writ large. This notion of a white identity became a fact of life for them. And the same can be said for virtually everyone. Women, which is why you have this sort of atavistic occurrence of women, crying rape against Black men when they know, of course, no rape has actually happened. They want the privileges of being protected by whiteness, by white men that they otherwise might not get, right? Because women, of course, we know are subjugated almost as bad as I would say Blacks, certainly not as much as Black women, but they're subjugated as well by racial capitalism. And so you've got this system of racial capitalism which creates these buffer classes. And now you could even argue it happened after the World War II with the Jews, where that we really created this, the Zionist identity was really created, really expanded after World War II, where the elites offered Jews the protection of being white if they just wouldn't work with Blacks, because Jews and Blacks were the vanguard of that revolution that occurred during the New Deal, during the Great Depression. That was really the vanguard of the revolution. So, and now you could say that the elites are peeling off another layer, which is, or at least they're working to peel off another layer. I don't think it's complete, but they're peeling off the Black elite, which I think we saw really in play in this last election, where you had a very real. We've always had a class divide within our community, but now I think you see there's this yawning class divide where the Black elites were pulling for Kamala Harris, and the working class Blacks are saying she's done nothing for us. I don't see any reason to vote for Kamala Harris. And so, most Blacks did not vote for Donald Trump, which is how the mainstream media wants to portray us. But there certainly was a difference of opinion between working class Blacks and the Black elite, the Black boule, as someone called them. And I would say, and this is something I think we should all keep our eyes on and perhaps work towards producing the right outcome. I think the Latino community is very much in play. I think there's an idea that Blacks are xenophobic, and there is too much xenophobia in the Black community for my taste. But there are also very real signs that the immigrants who are coming over from Mexico, from Salvador, from Guatemala, from Venezuela, that they are also radicalized by the struggles in their country against the United States, and that they actually might join with Blacks to create a new political reality, right? A new rainbow coalition, if you will, particularly when you think about the Jews, the anti-Zionist Jews who are, I think, leading this fight against the genocide in Gaza, Palestinians in places like Chicago and other Arab groups in Detroit and across the country. And so I don't think we can say with any kind of certainty what's going to happen, but there are signs that the attempts by the elites to peel off the Latino and sort of give them the illusion that they could be white if they just, or at least honorary whites if they just work against Black people. I'm not convinced that's going to be successful. I think we're going to have to wait and see, because you see signs everywhere in Los Angeles, in Chicago, in New York.
I want to stop you because we're getting into a lot, and it's good that we're getting into a lot, but I don't want to get too far away from certain points. And again, we're having a conversation. This is my brother, colleague, for better or for worse, for your career, for better or for worse. my brother, colleague. We're having a conversation. but I know that I have points of contention. Some of it is just nuance.
Okay.
There's nothing really too antagonistic. But before we get too far ahead, let me go back for a second. You talked about this dock worker strike in New Orleans, and you kind of begin the book from the point of the Civil War, the end of the Civil War, the battle during the Civil War, and the end of enslavement. I want to go back for a second. Why did you, in this book, not pay more? Hold on. First of all, actually, let me get it again. Class War in America: How the Elites Divide the Nation by Asking, Are you a worker or are you white? That is the full title of the book. Why is it that you, in the book, did not pay more attention to the development or the enshrining of white supremacy after Bacon's Rebellion, with the laws that began to be codified in Virginia?
Yeah.
Why not begin the book there as opposed to the end of enslavement?
I thought that's a great question, and I did think about that initially. I gave up on the idea pretty soon. I'll tell you for a couple of reasons. One was the discovery of this Battle of the Crater, which was the which that battle to me was just so dramatic, and I had never heard of it until I started researching this book. That battle was so dramatic, right? And also, I always knew this was going to be a long book, and I was always trying to keep it from being too long. And so I thought maybe the way to truncate it a little bit is to begin with the Civil War, right? This period where millions of Blacks entered the workforce, many of them with skills that eclipsed that of whites. So I guess there are two reasons I would say. One is, although I do mention Bacon's Rebellion, I do believe, but one is that Battle of the Crater, which was just so dramatic for my purposes, and probably fulfilled my vanity as a writer, which I'm sure you can relate to.
The writing in your book is really lyrical and wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
I think I had a bit of hateration in me. I was like, I don't want to hear all of that.
Oh, that means a lot coming from you, because I still think your book on Oscar Grant is state of the art. So that means a lot. Yeah,
it wasn't as lyrical. I'm taking lessons from you, absolutely. I'll be so lyrical in my writing.
All right. I would tell you the check is in the mail, but I'm lying. Right. When it comes to me giving anybody money, it's a lot. And so what? Okay, so what was the question again? Why I started with why I didn't start with I tried to sort of harken back to that a little bit. I mentioned, of course, Ted Allen's reinvention of the white race, and how, because the fulcrum of this book is the development of a white identity. It's not. I can't remember if I wrote this, but the Jews, the Italians, the Irish, the British, the French, the Portuguese, they're glorious people, right? But white people, that's a whole nother animal, as they said in A Fear of a Black Hat, right? That's a whole other group, right? And that it is that transition from European to white. That's the fulcrum of the book. That's the fly in the ointment, right? And that's what we're still dealing with today. I don't know if in our lifetimes, Thandisizwe, we will ever see that reversed. I think it's become like a religion. I do write about that in the book. The white identity has become like a religion, which is why I think you're seeing these mass shootings, which are racially motivated. This January 6th, right? It's like a religion. And one thing we don't talk about enough, and I'll make this quick. I know I tend to run on, but I think that we don't talk enough about how, I talk about this at the beginning of the book, after the war, particularly in that first year, there was this real belief by many, many whites, particularly in the South, that Blacks would take over, that Blacks were going to kill them and take over, and they were going to be ruled by N-word government, right? I think that still exists. I think I nod to this, but maybe I could have said it more explicitly. I think that is still the fear. I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think that it is expressed as a religion that white people will never be ruled by Black people. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think that is still what's driving the conversation. No, it's not driving the conversation. It's driving the action. It's driving and the Democrats, and I'll end on this. The Democrats really feed into that because they appeal to. That's why Kamala Harris lost this race. The war in Gaza had a lot to do with it as well. But the reason the Democrats, since Bill Clinton, have not been able to really, because most people are not Republicans. Most voters are not Republicans. The Democrats have a clear advantage of that in that regard. But they actually seek to punish, to lynch blacks publicly. That's what the omnibus crime bill was about, right? It wasn't that the racial disparities were unintended. They were the point. They want to show white people, look, you don't have to worry about these black people. We got them under control. And that's why Kamala Harris, however you say her name, that's why she's campaigning with Liz Cheney instead of going to the hood talking about, hey, look, we're gonna do something about. She's talking about we'll erase the medical debt from your credit report. Why don't you erase the medical debt? They don't want to be seen as doing anything for black people because they believe that will turn white people off.
So I don't know how long we're going to be here today, but let me throw out, we need to return to this question and the Turner Diaries. We're going to come back to that. If we don't get to today, we're going to have part 3. But let me go back again. I also had not heard about the Battle of the Crater. Let's let our audience, for those who don't know, tell them what the Battle of the Crater is. You begin the book with the horrific and gruesome tale of the Battle of the Crater during the Civil War. And it's an allegory for the racial solidarity of whites. Might also be a metaphor for the birth of the Republic. Let the Black Liberation Media audience know about the Battle of the Crater.
It's, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, I will turn 60 in January. Mm-hmm. And this might be one of the most horrific. I was shocked by this, right? I was really shocked by the story. I think it was the spring of 1864 in Petersburg, Virginia. The Confederacy and the Union troops it was a stalemate, basically. They had been there for weeks and there was some skirmishing, but no real battles. Neither side could kind of penetrate the other. Finally, a group of a mine worker from Pennsylvania suggested for the Union troops that we could dig a tunnel underneath the Confederate encampment, pack it with dynamite, and detonate it. And then in the confusion, we can go in and we can attack, and we can beat them because we have the element of surprise. Mm-hmm. And they did this, and they actually trained the United States colored troops for this encounter to lead this attack. And the United States colored troops trained for it by what they call a pincer attack, where they would go on either side. The troops would go on either side of the fissure that was created by this explosion and attack, right? And at the last minute, the major in charge thought, these Negroes, they can't pull this off, right? So you had the white people do it. They drew straws, and the regiment that won was led by General Ledlie, I think was his name. He was a drunk, and his regiment was actually very war weary. I think they were from South Carolina. They were very war weary, I think, and not South Carolina. I'm sorry, Massachusetts, I think. And they were very war weary, and they didn't train for this. So when they did detonate this bomb, this dynamite in the middle of the night, they ran through the fissure, which was crazy because the fissure was slippery.
The crater.
Yeah, the crater, right? The Battle of the Crater. Yeah, they ran through it. It took them forever. So during this time, the Confederate troops were surprised, but they had time to regroup, and it killed a few, like 200, I think, like 250 men automatically. But they had time to regroup. So by the time that the Union troops, these white Union troops who were leading the charge, by the time they surfaced, the Confederate troops were just waiting for them, and it became like a turkey shoot, basically. Mm-hmm. And this went on. They kept sending white troops through the crater, right? They were coming up, and they were being slaughtered. They were being massacred by the Confederate troops. And this went on for hours till finally, it was almost a suicide mission, they thought at the time. They sent in the colored troops finally, right? Mm-hmm. And it almost sounds like you're making it up, but books have been written about this. This is true. The brothers they went around the crater, and they started kicking much Confederate behind. And after they started capturing Confederate flags, they rallied the demoralized white troops who were taking the ass whooping, right? They demoralized the white troops, and they start for a while. It was like they were coming back. It was like a comeback for the ages, but it was just too much to overcome. And so finally, the white flag went up from the Union troops that they were surrendering. The Confederate troops were just enraged by the idea of blacks fighting against them. Mm-hmm. And so they went through shooting them, stabbing the blacks in the back in the crater, and the ones they had captured, they went stabbing them. Mm-hmm. And then they urged the white Union troops to do the same, and they complied enthusiastically. One of them said that we were afraid that if we didn't, the Confederate troops might kill us as well, right? Which seemed kind of cowardly, I would think. But I think the one historian said that he thought that about 250 blacks, colored troops, colored soldiers were killed after the ceasefire, after the surrender. And so I wrote that this is a metaphor for the class war in America, which is prosecuted as a racial war, a race war here in the United States. And the northern, we can assume, or we can say, for the sake of argument, liberals, white liberals, turning on the blacks who had just built them out. Because this is a central point in the book, a central theme. It's not just that the American democracy works better when blacks participate, right? Just for the sheer fact it's a reflection of democracy. It is our ideas as people of the African diaspora. It is our ideas that inform what I guess technically is still the most prosperous working class in the history of the world. That's our ideas, right? Public education, integrated labor unions, which emphasize buying power for the collective, and that buying power fuels a consumer economy unlike anything the world has ever seen. And it is the purge of Black people, the alienation, the death, physical death in the Battle of the Crater, social death that we see going on today. It is that death of the African in America that is central to our malaise and our discontent. You can't get there from here, right? We can't continue with these same policies and hope that we will regain any kind of prosperity. We have to somehow figure out a way to include Black people.
So the Battle of the Crater has been called the worst racial massacre of the Civil War, not just by you, but even I consulted something on the internet. It was some Army database. They also thought that it was the worst of the Civil War, even worse than the Fort Pillow incident, where Nathan Bedford Forrest, a Confederate general who later became a founder of the Ku Klux Klan, instructed his troops to kill all of the surrendering Black troops. About 300 Black Union soldiers were killed. The Fort Pillow, that was Fort Pillow. According to the database that I saw, the statistical breakdown, the Army thinks that upwards of 400 Black troops were killed at the Battle of the Crater. Making it the worst massacre of the Civil War. But again, the reason you use it, I'm assuming, as a metaphor is because these are white Union soldiers who have now turned on Black Union soldiers.
That's right.
Killed them. Racial solidarity.
Right.
Confederate. Right. When I read that blew my mind. I was like, excuse my language, Black liberation media family.
Right.
God damn.
You and me both. I think I had to read it like 2 or 3 times. Like, it is. It really is. It's monstrous, really. It really is monstrous. Particularly when you think about how we portray the military these days, the soldier. Leave no man behind. They didn't just leave men behind, they buried them. They buried them where they stood. Them. Yeah, they killed them. That's right.
We didn't get that from Glory with Denzel and Morris.
Right.
We didn't get that from them.
Right, exactly.
Give them hell, 54th. That's what we got.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
A great movie, but one that was not really representative of the times. No, I agree.
So
Young
anyway.
Denzel.
Damn
Now, apparently he's kissing other men in Gladiator.
Well, now, okay, hold on.
I don't know what happened.
Let's not go there. Let's not go there. But at any rate, again, it's just so much to deal with this subject in general. So much that your book deals with, which is a wonderful book, I do have to say, even though I ain't finished reading it all. I was able to get into it, and again, I love the way that you're writing. There are some nuances, I believe, things that I take issue with.
Okay.
And because you're my brother, I'm gonna hit you upside the head with.
That's all right.
One of the things, it's so much. I was trying to write notes based upon, okay, start at the introduction and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much. What did we say? Hold on. Class War in America. How the elites divide the nation by asking, are you a worker or are you white? By Jon Jeter. Y'all, please, if you don't have the book, please go get the book and support this brother. Okay, so let me just go to my notes here. It's so much. Even with the notes, I kind of want to go in a linear logistical order, but I don't even know if I'm gonna be able to do that. So we just
you the MC. So however you want to do it,
we gonna make it do what it do. So let me just read my notes. I'm having difficulty with nuances. The energy I feel, and probably if I had get to the end of the book, I might feel different. But let me just, like I said, let me just pay attention to my notes.
Yeah.
Putting forth that the energy feels like it is a deliberate employing of a tactic, i.e. dividing the working class, from a playbook that has been written, printed, copyrighted, and bound, but kept secret and passed only from manager/boss to manager/boss, instead of a deeply embedded, deep-seated mass psychosis. I believe that is what white supremacy is. I don't believe white supremacy or racism was created to divide the working class. I believe it exists and does that, but I don't believe that's where it came from. I think it's a mental illness. And as Frank Wilderson, what Frank Wilderson refers to when he talks about the libidinal economy, what he even said to me in a phone call, he was talking about the development in slavery in Europe versus the development of slavery elsewhere. I haven't seen that yet in his writing, but he had blown my mind. I had to call him up and talk to him. He said that whites made a poor economic decision not to enslave other whites. If they had, Europe would have developed economically quicker. He said they made a poor economic decision, but a good mental health decision. Mentally healthy for them, I think, because of the fear of white genetic annihilation. And I know when we hear those words,
right.
Lord, Francis West, oh my God.
A lot of us are triggered. Yeah.
Now, here's the thing. I believe that you even hint at that, or not necessarily hinted at it. You stated in chapter 4, when you write, what remains disturbingly constant is the white settlers' ritualized desecration of the black body. When Frank Wilderson said, in addition to that, and when he said to me, there is nothing too horrific that can happen to black people under white supremacy because of anti-blackness. I said, that is the language I have been looking for.
Yeah.
Because no one, not even you, my brother, I am not going to allow anyone to say to my face, chaining up a black man behind a truck and dragging him until his head comes off.
Yep.
is a result of competition for jobs. I'm gonna take off these earrings. I'm gonna put some gasoline on my face, and I'm gonna see you. You are not going to tell me that. There's something else going on here that is psychological. It's not simply economic.
I don't.
What I'm saying to you, my brother, is I feel like there's a nuance or an energy.
When
we talk about when we talk about racism is or white supremacy exists, or it's used to divide the working class. But I don't believe it was created for that. And as for Joshua, I know where the word slave comes from. I understand that. I don't think. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm up here arguing. That's not true. The word slave comes from Slav, which is an Eastern European word. So Professor Wilderson's history is off. No, I don't think so. The whole of Europe was not enslaved.
The
way the rest of the world, the way that African people.
No. And that was a very intentional choice. That was a very intentional choice.
When he said, if the wholesale, maybe I didn't say that, the wholesale Slav, Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, that's a particular word from those particular regions, cultures, people, languages. All of Europe was not enslaved.
No.
All of Europe was not enslaved. So when Wilderson says, if it had been enslaved, it would have progressed economically quicker. That for me was the language I was looking for. It's so much. You done brought up so much good. We need to be doing all of this talking.
Well, no. You raised the guy, and this reminds me. The next time I write a book, I'm going to have you read it before I publish, because that's a great point. I really do think that's a great point. First of all, I agree with what you're saying. I do think it's not just economic. I think the point of departure, and I think this is small. I do think it was created as a purely economic strategy, but I think it has become. I mean, you think about it even today, but this has always been the case where this idea of race and racism as blacks as inferior people, which by the way, a lot of it. I think I try to hint at this. A lot of racism. Really, I would argue that most of racism today in the United States certainly is driven by jealousy, right? This understanding that these people that they have said, white people have said, are inferior. In fact, well, at the very least, we're not inferior, right? I think that really, and so I do believe that it's become. I agree with you. It's a psychosis, and the most rigid adherents to this idea of white supremacy are madmen. I don't think there's any question about that. And I would include in that the president-elect, right? But I would also include the president of the United States. I believe that the Democrats and I'll try to make this quick. I do believe that the Democrats in 1992, when Bill Clinton was running for president, and they were trying to figure out how do we retake the White House from the Republicans, particularly this party that Ronald Reagan reinvented, right, as basically this party of redemption to redeem the country from inward rule, right, even though that was clearly not even close to the case. And they decided we could go the route of Jesse Jackson and try to bring more and more people, particularly people of color, poor whites, into this rainbow coalition, or we can go the way of Ronald Reagan's party and try to outdo them for the votes of white racists. And it's clear which one they chose. And so we're living with that today. And so, this idea, though, of white superiority, when it's drummed in your head every day, all day, in the media, news media, the entertainment media, in the academy, right? It's exceptional to hear, no, really, whites aren't superior. All intelligence studies that have some component where they measure for prenatal health care, all longitudinal studies show that blacks are at least the equal of whites in intelligence. And many of them show that our babies actually have a slight advantage, right? I do believe that idea over time of inverting reality, I think it becomes equal parts a religious cult, right? But at the same time, it is and a psychosis, right? Which I mean, that's the same thing, right? a religious cult that is partly a psychosis. Maybe they work hand in hand, but I don't disagree with you. I would be interested when you finish the book if you still think that I did not reflect that this is more than an economic strategy. And I maybe didn't do it justice. I would concede I might not have done that justice, but I do agree with you. That is it is much more than economics, and that's what we got to deal with somehow or another.
Absolutely, absolutely. Going back to my notes, Du Bois even hinted at it. Du Bois, you know how black folks do.
Right.
W.B. Du Bois hinted at it, and he called it the psychological wage.
Yep.
It's paid to the white overseers and slave drivers, the white workers, hell, just white people. Yeah. The idea that you too are at least you better than a nigger.
Right.
You're better than a nigger.
Right.
And you are a part of this system. Your job will be to police the nigger.
Yes.
Maybe one day you can own niggas too.
Right. And that's what they're telling now to black people, right? Which is why we've got the Kamala Harris and the Barack Obamas, right? And in Barack Obama's case, it turned out to be very true, right? Kamala Harris less so, but yeah, it really is an agreement. It's a racial contract, as a sociologist who was a sociologist who said that whites agreed to deliberately misinterpret the world in exchange for rights and privileges of being superior to black people, not being dispossessed the way that black people are. I mean, nobody wants to be black because they understand, what we're up against. They deny it, they gaslight it. They talk about DEI as a problem in identity politics, which, by the way, they created both. But yeah, I mean, I wish I could be more hopeful. I think I end the book in as hopeful a fashion that I can. But there's a lot that we need to be very fearful of in this moment. And it's not just because Donald Trump was reelected. If Kamala Harris had been elected, we would be facing the very same issues and problems.
So again, I'm going through notes. The words of sociologist Oliver Cromwell Cox on lynching. It was the most powerful and convincing force of racial repression operating in the interest of maintaining the status quo. So what is the status quo? In my opinion, the status quo is white. And while there may be stratification within that white, they are united by white supremacy. White supremacy is the glue that binds not only classes, it binds white women and white men. Yes. It binds white gays and lesbians. It binds white differently abled people. It binds the white elderly. It is the glue that binds. This is not to ignore class, capitalism's interests, but I do not think that means what you think it means. These are the notes that I'm writing to myself. And I don't know. Okay, hold on. Let me just. Oh, wait. Okay, there you go.
I lost you for about 10 seconds.
So David Silver said his take on that is wilder than he knows, talking about Frank Wilderson. Okay, I'm just trying to catch up on some of these comments. Europeans lost their ability to relate to their and others' human and tribal identity generations before inflicting their affliction on us. The disease of madness is individualism.
I don't disagree with that.
Before they came to us.
Yeah.
But when you bring up the word individualism, people say, see, capitalism. I'm like, no, predate capitalism. But that's just me. Hey, Monty Nile, how are you? It is intentional. And once infected, it's easy to make any group the other, even their own great-grandchildren. Okay.
Right. Like Thomas Jefferson. That's very true. It's very true.
Now, back to me and Josh were going to have an argument. I see that right now. He said they wouldn't have. That's incorrect. Slave labor versus wage labor has advantages and disadvantages in capitalist development. Of course, they all do.
But I would just say to the greater economy, slave labor doesn't make any sense, right? In classical macroeconomic theory, and that's what we're dealing with now. and Du Bois, or Dubois, depending on how you say it, he wrote this in Black Reconstruction, right? One of the real failures of the slaveocracy, of the slave owners, the failure of their thinking was that, he said, if they had just freed the slaves, agreed to free the slaves, and hired them, paying them very little, right? They would have recouped all of that money and more, right? They would have expanded the buying power, very much like Henry Ford, even though Henry Ford didn't give the $5 a day to blacks, really. But much like Henry Ford's thinking that, if he gave his workers $5 a day, they could then afford to buy his cars, right? It's the same thing with slavery. If you had freed slaves, you would have expanded the buying power and got that money back 2 or 3-fold, right? And the slavery by another name would have existed, well, it still exists, but it would have existed in stronger form, I guess, for another 50 years. So, these are all arguments and discussions that we need to have, I think, as we forge our way forward.
Mm-hmm. Joshua again. Cromwell murdered the Irish and sent them to slavery in Barbados and Bermuda. And it's definitely psychological, just as it's economic and political and social. It's a complete system of conquest. No argument on that point.
Right. And if I could, Wilderson, you will see he appears quite a bit in the book,
right?
Because I do believe Afro-pessimism is a very cogent point. And I don't remember if I wrote about the idea of necropolitics, which is a Cameroonian scholar named Akili Mbembe. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. They're very similar. Akili Mbembe says that whites have an understanding, perhaps subliminal, that for them to live, racialized or colonized people must die, right? We call it collateral damage, but it's really a gamble, an exchange that many whites are willing to make in racialized or colonized societies, because they understand that the death of dark-skinned people means a better life for themselves. And I do believe, again, I think back to your point, that it's more than just an economic strategy. It becomes a psychological psychosis, a sort of international delusion or national delusion in the case of the United States.
And there are those who are going to be like, they're going to roll their eyes. I'm just going to throw it out there. Francis Welsing, I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to keep it moving. Let me go on back to these notes.
and I think Dr. Welsing, I think she had a point. I don't know that it was genetic, but I certainly believe there is a widespread fear by whites of Negro rule. And I don't know if that's genetic or not. I don't know enough about science to know that, but I do believe that's true.
White people can be genetically annihilated.
Right.
But since you bring that up, the Turner Diaries, said to be, and I forget the guy who wrote it, but said to be one of the Bibles of the white supremacist movement, talks about, these, I forget who the different players are, but I'll just lump them all together. The white supremacist movement. They have a hatred, of course, of people of color. They have a hatred also of the federal government. And so a federal government united with black people is like their their perfect storm.
Right.
Whole shit storm,
right.
And so you have in Obama, who ascends the presidency. You have Eric Holder over the Justice Department, and his replacement, I forget the sister's name, another woman, a black woman who took over the Justice Department right after Eric Holder left.
Oh, right. Yeah. Loretta something. Yeah. I know you're talking about.
So you black people black people inside of government, other than Colin Powell, I think it was a Togo West. It was someone else.
Right.
We know Clarence Thomas ain't worth a damn.
Right.
But the point being, black people ascending to these quote unquote levers of power, highest levers of power within the federal government, hinting at, oh my God, the niggas is taking over.
Yes.
Which is one of the reasons why there's always the attempts to disenfranchise and keep the vote away from us.
No question.
Yeah, the question of black rule is absolutely on the table.
Yeah, and these people you mentioned, and this is really, I think, relevant for you because you know a lot of these people on a first name basis. But it is that.
What'd you say?
I said, you know, a lot of these people, the sort of people from the radical Black Power generation, like Dhoruba Ben Wahad, you know these people firsthand. But really, Obama and all these people you mentioned, they are the elite's response, like almost manufactured like Frankenstein monsters. And particularly when we talk about people like Obama and Cory Booker, almost literally manufactured like Frankenstein monsters to be a response to the radical Black Power movement, to be a response to the Dhoruba Ben Wahads and Tupac's stepfather who passed recently. And they're meant, right, to dumb down our imagination, to make us, I think back, I think we're the same age, roughly the same age, Standy, and you probably remember Bill Cosby and his show just as I did, and it had some merits artistically, right? It was the first show, the Bill Cosby show in the 80s, right? What was that called? The Cosby Show, right? Was that the Cosby Show in the 80s? Yeah, with Heathcliff.
The 90s,
yeah. I think about in the 80s, but that was intended to show Black people that if you give up your anger and you accept our ways, right, you can be happy just like us. You can have the perfect family and all this money. That was the message, right? And that was a turning point as well as we sort of, as the United States began to. I think it's not written down, but I think that or at least not that we know. I think the COINTELPRO movement ratcheted up to a PSYOPs campaign, particularly in the late 70s, early 80s, where they tried to defeat this radical Black Power movement and tried to make sure they never surfaced again with these subliminal messages about Black anger and Black resentment and just lay back and relax and be like us.
So going through the book, y'all just got to work with me. I'm trying to, anyway, buy the book and read the book. Anyway, so I say, how prescient, am I using the word correctly?
I believe so.
Of you to have a chapter 3, begin with the story of Susan Smith, who was recently in the news being denied parole 30 years after her horrific crime. Why would you why would you even have a chapter in your book that talked about Susan Smith? What's the name of the chapter? Chapter 3?
Was that Weapons of Mass Destruction, I believe?
Weapons of Mass Destruction.
Yeah. I was doing some research and I knew that the Wilmington Massacre of 1898 was really a turning point because it created, it didn't create, but it codified it. This idea of Blacks, particularly Black men, as weapons of mass destruction, right? With this idea of a racial hoax. The brother did it, right? The idea that Black men are racist and sexually menacing. Right.
James Simmons, whenever I get on his case, he always says, blame the nearest Black man.
Right. That's actually the sort of unofficial policy. And Wilmington really underscores that, right? It was, and I think this is important. This was lost, even in the really good documentary, which had Robin D.G. Kelly on it recently, the PBS documentary about Wilmington, which I think was very well done. But one of the things that my chapter talks about that I don't think theirs does so much, if I can plug my book shamelessly, I think it talks about the political realities, right? It was the Democrats who back then were really the Republicans, right? Who have been ousted from office by this coalition of Black Republicans and the populists who are white. And the populists initially were very racist, because they're white, right? But they realized that to be effective, to be elected to office, they had to tone that down and bring Blacks in. They did. 1896, I think, was their first elected. And in a period of 2 years, they democratized the state. They spent money on education and on infrastructure and on roads for everybody, right? So it lifted the standard of living for everybody who was a worker. And at the same time, it lowered the return, the interest rates on bonds that are brought by the wealthy to finance public works, right? And so the Democrats, they knew they couldn't beat them at the ballot box, so they conspired to how do we attack this in a psychological way? How do we appeal to a white working class so they will actually vote against their interests? Well, the Black man is raping. Black man is raping your women. And of course, there's no evidence at all that this was the case. And they created this. They had this coup, a massacre, and this became almost the baseline for Jim Crow. I think it was 8 years later we saw the same kind of coup in Atlanta, in Georgia. The Atlanta Riots of 1906, and this became the baseline with the racial hoax of the Black rapists as its foundation, right? And so in researching this book anyway, I discovered this academic, I think she's now retired, a white woman named Glenda Gilmore, who is all over this issue of racial hoaxes and white women claiming rape when they have not been, and why they do that. She's all over it, and just a wonder. I wish I could have interviewed her. But in discovering her, I discovered the Susan Smith case and why it's representative of this racial hoax and this realignment of class in the United States, using women, particularly white women, particularly to bludgeon Black people. And so that's why I use Susan Smith.
Mm-hmm. White women complicit again.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've gotten to chapter 5, I think, which is about the Scottsboro boys, but we will see that.
And you mentioned about with the Scottsboro boys, the way, again, I love your writing, but the way you put it, this is now an attempt for the poorest of the poor white women, the downtrodden white woman. Yes. She now has an opportunity to be protected by white patriarchal power.
Yes.
If she just turns on Black people,
that's all she's got to do.
Accepted, and her sins will be washed
away. Yeah,
white as snow.
That is really the understanding even today. And just if I can speak about this briefly, Candy, because I think it's such an important point. The two women who initially falsely accused these 9 Black teenagers
was hoes.
Right, they were
hoes.
I'm not a woman,
sex workers.
I can't use that word. I gotta use that.
You can't use that word. They were hoes.
Right. They were. And the Communist Party, they found this out in their reporting, and they reported it, and it became an international movement on behalf of these young black defendants, right? And it really changed everything, and especially because the parents of the defendants the Communist Party sent them all across the world to raise money and to gin up support, and that was really effective. But these two women, they had been laid off from the textile mill where they worked, or they were still working. They were only working part-time.
They were poor workers.
They were poor. They
had to turn to sex work.
Right.
Women of the night.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, and they were, as I write the book, they were considered poor white trash. They were from the poorest neighborhoods. One of them, I think they said, had sexual relationships with Black men. Not because of her sex work, because they lived among Black people, right? So they were really poor, right? And this became, and so this idea, and it's almost, I read about this in the book. They stopped the train because these young Black men had a fight with these white guys, and of course the brothers won, although they didn't hurt anybody. And the brothers won. They stopped the train. They called ahead. They stopped the train, and these women were on the train, and they asked them, did these boys hurt you? And at first, the oldest of the two, they were 21 and 19. She said no, and then they kept prodding them. Go ahead, tell me they hurt you, didn't they? Right? And she said, oh yeah. And she gave this Austin Powers-like story about, first they said they was going to kidnap them. Then they said they was going to stick it in. I was going to have a Black baby. I mean, it would be funny were it not so tragic, right? But again, right. But this peeling off, this is the point I want to make. This peeling off of white women who should have been allies to the Black working class, right? And one of them in the end was the younger one. She renounced everything she said. And actually, and that's the point I wanted to make in the book too. White people don't understand what they've done in terms of when they've actually stepped up. Because this white one, the younger one of the two, I can't remember her name. I think it was Ruby Bates was the one who stepped up, and she actually worked with the mothers of the Scottsboro boys, went around the country, saying, look, apologizing. Yeah, but she did. To her credit, she did apologize. She said, I'm sorry, and if I could do anything to help our class, because it was the bosses who made me do this, right? But this idea of peeling off these white women, right? And you would see it 20 years later. That's why they electrocuted the Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, right? It wasn't because of the nuclear secrets, which they may or may not have done. But even if they did do it, at worst, it shortened the time for the Soviets to get the bomb from 5 to 4 years. That's the worst case scenario. The Soviets had the bomb, basically. They wanted to show Jews, who are our biggest allies, particularly in the Scottsboro Boys case, they wanted to show them, if you keep messing with them inward, this is what you got coming. That was the point. That's why there was huge outpouring of Black support for the Rosenbergs, right? I write about Lorraine Hansberry, who got married on the day after they were executed. And she was so down, so depressed, that she got married, said her vows, and went to a corner and just sulked, because it meant so much to her, right? She saw this as a lost battle in the class war. But this is how they peel us off, and they dangle this idea of whiteness. And the last thing I'll say about that, and so I think it was a year after, but it was 2 years after the Rosenbergs were executed, and 1 year after Brown versus Board of Education, we first heard of Milton Friedman, right? A Jewish economist who came to fame. His claim to fame initially was the idea of vouchers, which would give white parents a way to escape integration, right? And so that's no surprise. What they did was Zionism existed before Brown versus Board of Education, but it really expanded this notion and made it very real, right? This is what, Milton Friedman did very well for himself by turning against Black people and other people of color, working class people in Chile. And this was the point, right? This is how they asked, are you a worker or are you white? They really asked that of everybody, even Black people sometimes. And I don't know if Barack Obama really, well, I guess he is half white anyway, but Kamala Harris, I don't know if she really thinks she's white, but she certainly thinks she's a better grade, a lot closer to white than the average Black person.
I'm speaking with my colleague, comrade, brother, Jon Jeter, Class War in America, How the Elites Divide the Nation by Asking, Are You a Worker or Are You White? This is his most recent book, out now. Please support the brother and get his book. And I ended up putting the banner on late. Please support Black Liberation Media. Please support Rootwork. The Cash App and the Venmo are down there. I can see it streaming. Do y'all see it streaming? If you see it streaming, you need to hit the Cash App or the Venmo. Support Black Liberation Media if you don't already, and support Rootwork if you don't already. I had to get the commercial in. So again, I haven't finished the entire book. I've gone through as much of it as I can. My last note, and that doesn't mean that we have to end the conversation, but okay. I just took down this quote, and again, I made notes. Yes, we're skipping around. Pay attention. Moreover, the combination of government, you were talking about immigrants and the textile strikes in the northeastern U.S. I'm sorry for my audience. I do not have it might be chapter 11. I don't remember. The point being, you're talking about immigrants and striking and the power of labor. You said, moreover, the combination of government raids, such as the Palmer raids, and vigilante violence impressed upon immigrants. Which were the immigrants? You talked about Italians, of course,
right?
Not Irish, but
the people who are coming over from Ellis Island, a lot of Russians, Central Europeans,
etc. The importance of choosing race over class. And you talk. So again, that's what you were talking about in this particular chapter regarding European immigrants. Moreover, the combination of government raids and vigilante violence impressed upon immigrants the importance of choosing race over class. So my note is, how is this different from today, when even Black immigrants are encouraged to stay away from Black folks born and raised in this country, where their stereotypes and fears and myths are fed? How is that different? Is it economic competition that does that, or plain anti-Blackness? Because they too, Black immigrants, are hated because they are Black. Witness Springfield, Ohio, and Haitian immigrants.
It's not different at all. It's identical. It's exactly the same. Maybe the means of communication are different, right? But it's exactly the same, and for the exact same reason. What they don't want is that an African political identity, which is based on communalism, right? Very similar to communism. They don't want that idea to surface, to re-enter the public discussion, because when that happens, things change, right? And maybe they don't change as much as we want, but things do change. I wrote about in I think it was chapter, I can't remember the chapter, but I wrote about the last general strike in the country, which was in 1946 in Oakland, where it was a wildcat strike, and it was a general strike that shut down the city. And they talk about that being a biracial bacchanal, blacks and whites in the street. They shut the city down. They closed. They told the bars, you got to close to everybody who's not a union member. I think that's what they said. And they said you got to bring the jukebox on the street. They closed everybody except for the bars, right? The bars, they said you stay open, but you gotta pull the jukebox on the street, right? And we get to play whatever we want. And they closed everything else except for, I think, medical supplies. They didn't close down hospitals, things like that. And it was a biracial bacchanal. That's the way they described it. Blacks and whites partying in the streets. And that was so dangerous, the idea of blacks and white workers shutting the city down and partying. That's what it was, a party, right? That was so dangerous that they passed the Taft-Hartley Act the next year, which outlawed the exact same kinds of strikes, general strikes, that took place in Oakland, right? And it's that idea. And again, you're right. The idea that it's just economic is not quite true. It's something spiritual about it on both sides. Many whites who see white supremacy as a religious devotion, but at the same time, it's that African voice. And I don't say this quite as explicitly as I wanted to, because I thought it might sound a little corny, but historically, when you have blacks and whites together, and you think about the general strike, because this happens at general strikes, and I've seen them in other places. When blacks start singing, things start to change, right? It's just that simple. And it could be blues, or it could be gospel. But when blacks start singing, and that historically is true, the slave owners would not allow blacks to sing. Sometimes they wouldn't let them sing, or even the wage labor, the slave labor they would have after slavery ended, where they would imprison prison labor, right? Chain gangs, yeah, they wouldn't let them sing, or they would say, well, you can sing this but not that. And so there's a reason for that, because those songs affect people. And so you're right, it is very much, it's not just an economic strategy. There's something very spiritual about it on both sides.
Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why Cabral talks about the importance of culture in a fight.
Yes, exactly.
It's also a cultural fight, not necessarily in terms of what we think of culture in terms of cultural nationalists. That's another show for another day.
Right.
But it's the cultural life of the people that must be harnessed in this fight. This is why we say that everything has got to be utilized for the struggle. Black art has to be utilized for the struggle. Black spirituality, Black religion, etc. Everything has to be utilized in our struggle. So I think you were talking about Middleton, Connecticut. Was it Connecticut?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you talked about at that point, the Irish had become white, but these other immigrants had not yet been absorbed into white.
That's right. And so what happened was there was a strike. There had previously been a strike somewhere in the Northeast. I can't remember, the one where we often refer to as Bread and Roses, where women, textile workers, went on strike and they won. There was some violence, but the women ultimately won. The textile industries were notorious for their abuse of women, and they won the strike because the whole community was unified. It was mostly Italians who were in that strike. There was another similar one though around the same time in Middletown, Connecticut, and it was Italians, I think, who went on strike, mostly workers at a textile company. I think it was Russell. It was a textile company which still exists to this day. And the Irish had come here, had arrived here earlier, at least in that community, and they'd already begun to think of themselves as white. So they actually, not only did they not win, they were crushed. This union of mostly or these strikers are mostly Italian union workers. They were crushed by the Russell executives because the community would not support them. The community wouldn't support them, much like, blacks are isolated today. Then, more than 100 years ago, the Italians were isolated by a community that had already started to think of itself as white. And I need to go get my plug, Dandy.
Yeah, go ahead.
60 seconds, okay.
All right, 60 seconds. Now, while Lawrence, yes, absolutely, the Bread and Roses strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts, he talks about that also in the book. So while we are waiting on John to get back, yes, sir. If there are any specific questions viewers have for John, put them in the chat and I can get them to him, because I have run out of notes. Again, get the book and read it for yourself, because I was all over the place today. But that's what it brought up a lot of things for me today. I was trying to write notes. I was trying to go in a linear fashion through the book, and I'm not going to lie. I can't say I didn't have enough time. I had enough time. Life be life, and I just couldn't get it. Wasn't able to read the book the way I wanted to read the book, the way the book should have been read. John, they clowning you. They can hear you stomping through the house. And she's looking for your cord and stuff.
We've got energy.
Okay, we've got energy. So I'm not seeing any more questions. I see people saying, thank you for the discussion today. Hey, Sugar Shan, how you doing? I ain't seen you in a minute. Matt Clubbin, who I most recently, a lot of these folks are regulars, So I most recently seen Matt Clubbin up in here. Thank you for the discussion. Thank y'all for tuning in on Turkey Day. I ain't had nothing else to do. I ain't gonna be watching no football. I'm about to go take a nap. That's what I'm gonna do.
I hear you. I hear you.
Watching no football.
You wore me out with your probing questions.
I remember thinking, man, if I could just okay, yes, this is great. Just keep talking. The more I read the book, I was like, oh man, this is how you ask intelligent questions. You read the material ahead of time. Wow.
Well, you can ask intelligent questions even without reading the material, but they are more intelligent when you read the material. Yes.
Such a prescient. That's my second time using that word. Such a prescient lesson I learned with that.
You must have just heard somebody say that word.
Just all you got to do is read the material. That's all you got to do.
Well, you
got to read, beloved. You got to read.
When I had you on my show on WPFW, I had at least read the first 2 chapters. I didn't read the whole book though. So this is apparently our pattern.
Okay, yeah. And nap sounds. Listen, the older I get, naps are the shit.
Oh, no question.
People don't want to.
No question. Yeah, no question. Remember when can you imagine being so young as babies that people had to actually make us take a nap? Could you imagine that today?
Fear of missing out. I don't want to go to sleep.
Right.
And now I can't wait. Wait.
But Danny, if I don't know if you want to continue or not, but I do want to make one point.
Let's do it
very briefly.
What'd you say?
I said I don't know if you want to wrap it up now, but I just want to make one point.
Go ahead.
I think it's very important, which is I don't want to demonize. I didn't want to demonize white people in this book. That's fine, and that's fine too, right? I want to talk about the white identity, and I want to be hopeful in the sense that I wanted to sort of give white people an understanding of what they can do, and that's throughout the book where I talk about people, the Rosenbergs, for instance, this woman Ruby Bates, who was one of the Scottsboro accusers, and that's throughout the book of white people who come. William Kunstler, Howard Zinn, Bernardine Dohrn was is still was a monster in terms of her support of the Black resistance. But
Marilyn Buck, David Gilbert.
Yes. Oh, David Gilbert. Yeah.
Linda Evans.
Yeah. Yeah. So many. So there really were, and they were the exception. We got to be honest; they were the exception, right?
Right.
But there are examples of people who choose class over race, and they have been, huge allies, right? But the thing I want to say is, I do think that the reason I think this book can be important for us going forward is that it is it tells us where the landmines are, right? And the landmine, and I think we're going to see very shortly a period where I talk about how since the end of the Civil War, in roughly 40 to 45 year periods, there are alternating periods of reconciliation and renunciation, right? We are now, since Reagan, we're in a period of renunciation, racial renunciation, where whites renounce it. And of course, it's never been a utopia by any stretch of imagination. But the New Deal period from roughly 1935 to about 1975 was a period of reconciliation where blacks and whites uneasily, but still we came together to fight, and we carved out more and more of this country for ourselves. And that's clearly borne out by the statistics. Now we're in this period of renunciation where whites are like, no, we don't want anything to do with your people. But I do think we're going to come up very shortly on a period of reconciliation. How far is that going to go? I can't say. Is it going to be an effective revolution or uprising? I can't say. But I do think we're coming to the point, based largely on what happened in Gaza, because I think what happened in Gaza is very much like the Scottsboro Boys, where many whites, are renouncing their whiteness to support a racialized group, and that augurs for a real racial reconciliation, and we can move forward, right? How far we will get, I don't know. We've really dug a hole for ourselves, both economically and politically. But the reason I say all this is that one thing I hope that Black people will keep in mind is that what happened at the Battle of the Crater is very likely to happen again. Even if we do have this reconciliation, if we do move forward as a nation with Black and white workers moving forward, conversing, planning, strategizing, and fighting the bosses, that there's still going to probably come a time when whites renounce us. And maybe centuries from now, that won't be the case. Maybe centuries from now, whites will no longer think of themselves as whites, but as workers, and we don't have to worry about that. But so all I'm saying is that in this next iteration, the third reconstruction, as Reverend William Barber says, I hope that we think about what Fred Hampton said, right? When he said Black power for Black people, white power for white people, X power for everybody he left out, that we think about what that looks like, right? Where we have our own sovereign, semi-sovereign neighborhoods. In other words, how do we control the means of production, the assets, our own institutions, so that when whites do turn on us, it doesn't matter nearly as much. I think that's, I didn't say that explicitly in the book, but I do think that is kind of the point that I'm making is we need to think about reparations as owning the means of production, controlling our community resources, and I don't know where that's going to be. We have to decide, but the South Side of Chicago and North Philly and Southeast DC and, all these neighborhoods are historically Black. How do we control the means of production and the institutions that are in those communities? I think that's what reparations needs. And money should be coming in too, but how do we do that in a way where the money works for our community as opposed to us just mimicking white wealth, right? Where it just goes to a few individuals. We need to think about rebuilding our community where on a class basis.
You said when they turn on us again, talking about white folks.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm not a fan of white power for white people. White power for white people.
As long as we have Black power for Black people, I think it's okay, right? If they have control of their communities, we have control over our communities. Whatever communities we say, this is our community. We decide what's taught in the schools. We have ownership of the businesses that are there and the homes. And maybe the ownership of the homes is more of a community or land trust as opposed to just individual people owning it. But I'm okay with white people having power over their own communities as long as I got power over my community. I'm fine with it,
Jason Wakeman, thank you for the discussion. John, I'm sold. I'm buying the latest, mostly because David endorsed. Does it build on your previous works or how does it relate? Hold up 1 second. You gonna buy it because David endorsed it? You're not gonna buy it because of nothing I said or nothing because of, that John said?
I wonder if you mean I had two Davids endorse it, both David Rodiger, the labor historian, and David Simon,
I think he's talking about David Spielberg, one of the members of the chat.
Okay.
Talking about David Spielberg, I'm hating. He does ask the question: does it build on your previous works, or how does it relate?
It definitely builds on both of them, both Flat Broke and the Free Market, especially, which really kind of diagnosed the problem of how the working class has suffered, particularly during this era of neoliberalism dating back, and the entire world. Right, we're talking about. I think the one thing I did in Flat Broke and the Free Market was I showed how neoliberalism has really hurt workers in Argentina and in South Africa and around the world, very much as it has hurt workers here in the United States. And I think this builds on it because and really the questions that were the idea for this book was formed right after I published Flat Broke and the Free Market, because Flat Broke and the Free Market really did raise the question of why, right? And one of the things I found out. One of the things I discovered in Flat Broke and the Free Market. I'm sorry to bore you, Tandy. I'll wrap it up very quickly. but one of the things I discovered in Flat Broke and the Free Market was this economic idea of import substitution, which is basically what the United States was between roughly 1935 and up until probably the 90s, right? Where basically everything that we made, we produced, right? We built, which means that you have wages that are commensurate with your buying power, your wages, you have buying power, you've got unions that advocate for the workers. It's a functional form of capitalism, not perfect, but it's a functional form of capitalism. This is the way that many of the African nations, and not just Africa, but in the global South, nations that have been colonized, Brazil, Zambia, South Africa to some extent, how they built their economies. They created everything that they consume, right? Which is a certain equilibrium to that. And it's interesting that Trump is talking tariffs now, which it probably won't because it's Trump. It could recreate that equilibrium, right? If you invested in certain key industries, you had tariffs, right, which would raise the price of exports or imports into the country, and you invested in those same industries, you could actually recreate or come very close to recreating the an industrialized America that was really the source, the cash cow for us for more than 40 years. Now we have a post-industrial state. And so I guess what I'm saying is that this book, I think, is a sequel to Flat Broke in that it describes and answers the question of why did the United States kill this cash cow, which was an industrialized America, right? And the reason is race. The reason, I mean, you can talk about a lot of things, right? But Reagan set out to kill this tenuous New Deal coalition between black and white workers, which was gobbling up more and more resources, GDP, for itself, right? And so Reagan, very much like Nixon before him, and Jimmy Carter was the bridge. He just didn't fight nearly as hard. He could have rebuilt the New Deal coalition, and he really chose not to. I hate to say that while he's on his deathbed, but it's the truth. And Reagan set out to basically crush that New Deal coalition, that New Deal consensus, by turning whites against black. But that's why so much of his message was racialized, right? And so this, I hope, hopefully, if you are going to buy it, you can tell me if I'm right, but I hope it builds on Flat Broke and the Free Market, especially, and to some extent, A Day Late and a Dollar Short, which really talked about the sort of post-racial America, the mythology of the post-racial America. I do talk a lot about that, about the peeling off of different tribes, but I devote, an entire, really 2 chapters to that, or chapter and a half to that when it comes to Black people, how since the 60s, the state has managed to peel off a layer, I say growing layer, but still relatively thin, of black elites and turn them against the Black working class. That's really a hole that we have to dig out from if we have any hope of prospering in the Black community.
What Glenn Ford would call the Black misleadership class.
Exactly. That's a real issue. That's a real issue. As we're seeing in post-apartheid South Africa, they're dealing with a very similar issue. It's Malcolm. I'm not advocating violence. So I think there are laws against that. But Malcolm was onto something when he asked why aren't there any Uncle Toms in China? They killed them all. I don't know that we need to talk about physical death, but we need to sort of in terms of in the Marxist terms of social alienation, we need to figure out a way to kill our turncoats within our community.
We do not advocate violence here.
We do not.
On Black Liberation Media. What we advocate is a study of history, such as the use of the necklace in the South African Azania freedom struggle.
Right.
Tires, rubber tires, and kerosene and matches.
Right.
Study the history.
A South African brother told me that the key is to get tires with grooves still in it. That the fires burn better when you can put the gasoline in that groove. I don't know. That's just in case anyone was wondering. I'm just saying.
As opposed to ball tires.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, I didn't know.
That's what I've been told. I don't know. If anyone might find that useful, I'm just saying.
You should. Yes, I'm absolutely sure. Absolutely sure. Absolutely. I want to give a shout out real quick to Matt Cubbin and Afia Zakia for hitting the Cash App, supporting Rootwork. Thank you so much. Again, I'm going to appeal again. If you don't already support Black Liberation Media on Patreon, please support Black Liberation Media on Patreon. Please support Rootwork with the Cash App and the Venmo. All that information should be on the screen down there. Oh, hold on. What's that? What'd you say? You weren't talking about violence. Oh, okay. Well, I was. Anyway. So I think some folks are expecting us to end. It's 1:38. Maybe the football game is another football game getting ready to come on. Maybe some folks need a nap like I need a nap. I don't know.
I would not think your audiences are big football fans, but maybe I'm wrong.
I don't think so either, but it could be that we're boring them. I don't know. But let's not drag it out if we don't need to drag it out. So again, I went through the book. She's staying. Okay, Manny. That's not what. Okay, well, what did you mean? Anyway,
make it plain.
Make it plain. Well, yeah. I attempted to go through the book as much as I could in preparation for today. I did not succeed in that. What points that you have not made already would you like for our audience to know?
Well, one, I think it's more for you to know because I think you will appreciate this as a Black journalist and a Black journalist who's engaged in emancipatory journalism is the relationship between mass communications and mass murder. And I write about one of my favorite chapters in the book is titled Embedded, and it begins with the murder of Fred Hampton. And 6 months after the murder of Fred Hampton, there was a story published. I don't know if you heard about this, Tandy, but when I first started journalism, this story was still a big deal. Tom Wolfe, and it was Party at Lenny's, and it was the fundraiser and Leonard Bernstein's town hall. Leonard Bernstein was a very popular radical chic. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
the flat catcher.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Yeah, so you clearly have heard of it. I'd heard about the story, but I never read it until I started researching this book. And that story by Tom Wolfe was a story that talked about a fundraiser for the New York 21, the Panthers who had been arrested for invented acts of terrorism. Right, didn't happen, including Tupac's mama, Afeni Shakur. There was a fundraiser held by Leonard Bernstein at his Tony townhouse on the Upper East Side, and the author, Tom Wolfe, was a white man who some people might or may not remember, was always dressed in white man, white hair, and white suit, always. I think he used to wear a red tie. And he wrote, it was almost like a fever dream, where he described the scene of these very rich whites and these Panthers who he described in overtly sexual terms, or overtly, he described one Panther is huge, and he talked about their clothing, and he talked about how it was kind of futile that we are whites and blacks are like two ends of a magnet, and it's almost like fun to try to put them together, but you can't, right? And that story was a turning point in the class war and in race relations because it spawned an entire industry, which I think is responsible for the industry that we see now in terms of the news industry. That is its purpose, its primary purpose is to foment this tribalism, right? That story, Radical Chic, Dinner Party at Lenny's, was meant to undermine racial solidarity between white leftists, particularly, you saw the Weather Underground, and Black people, particularly because they knew that they had gone too far with the murder of Fred Hampton. They had been murdering Panthers before that, but with Fred Hampton, it's like, oh, wow, we really kind of overstepped our bounds. And so they doubled down this narrative. A few months after that, I can't remember the name of this story, but it was a story by another journalist in New York Magazine where she talked about the Panther trial in Connecticut when there was a Panther who was murdered. We later found out by the FBI, I think, or an FBI informant or something like that. And she very explicitly tried to turn, it was an effort to turn the Black middle class against working class Black people, such as those who were in the Black Panthers. And so this understanding of our media today, or this informs our understanding of the media today. They continue, and I think it's subconscious at this point, right? You've got these kids who they've learned from the journalism schools and from their elders. Their purpose is to foment this tribalism. And I think that's an important point. I really think you will appreciate that when you get to the point in the book. But I also think it's something for your audience to look forward to if they have not yet read the book. That this media, all of our institutions failed. This is the point. All of our institutions in America have failed. Labor unions, the political parties, everything has failed. But I don't know if any is as big a failure or as pivotal a failure in our class war, in our losing the class war, at least the battle over the last 45 years, as the news media. And it's really worked very hard to keep us from reforming that tenuous rainbow coalition that we had in the 30s, late 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Colonizer of Minds asked, any ideas on how to win working class whites over to solidarity with the struggle against Black oppression? And that's something that came to my mind, is that this is a book that needs to be taught to white people.
Yes, that's
somebody
true.
needs to pick up that work and say, you know what, I'm going. Somebody needs to do that. I ain't the one. I'm tired.
No, I understand. I to the question. I part of it is kind of baked into our politics, right? Every 40 or 45 years, roughly, things fall apart, right? And we're seeing that now. This post-industrial society no longer delivers benefits even for white people, right? Well, Black people have it much worse, but even the return on whiteness has been diminished dramatically over the last 40 years. What does that mean? What that means is that very likely we're going to get to a situation, I think the next economic crisis, next financial crisis, which I think is probably going to happen within the next 6 months, will be of sufficient size and magnitude that whites will have no choice but to ally with us in the pursuit for things like single-payer health care. We need to do something about these, something we don't talk about, but I talk about in the book, the bonds that we lend. When we cut the budgets in these cities, what we're doing is we're trying to enrich very wealthy investors, because then they can loan the cities the money to help pay for infrastructure, to help pay for the bond, the public infrastructure that that the purpose of our budgets. And so they've jacked up the interest rates, and I talk about this in the book, even going back to the 1800s. They've jacked up the interest rates. So you have, for instance, I think it was a loan in San Diego by the school district that was taken out about 10 years ago. When that loan becomes due, it was about $100 million, but it's going to be $1 billion when the taxpayers have to pay back. that's something I think we're going to see some movement by white people because they have no choice, right? We have to sort of remake this economy. And I think white people, when their pain becomes just much more than they can bear, I think we're pretty close, they're going to, I think, start to sort of come back to the fold. But what I think we have to understand is that they are going to turn on us. So all I'm saying is that I think we need to understand there are sort of universal policies that can benefit all of us, but we need to think about reparations and getting white people on board with a reparations plan that attacks the rich, not them. And if I can, just very quickly, Dandy, so a book I want to write very soon is a book on, and you'll like this too, I think, Dandy, a book on how we can have a class-based reparations program. And what I want to propose is that we talk about restoring the Freedmen's Bank using this Robin Hood tax, which is a tax of approximately 1% on all Wall Street transactions. That would create about $700 billion every year, I would say. But it only affects very rich people, right? It won't affect if you sell your home or you buy or sell, some stocks in your pension portfolio or whatever. It doesn't really affect you. It affects high volume traders. My proposal is that we propose a Robin Hood financial transaction tax, and that's what reparations is funded with. We can have other things too, like tax increment financing in some cities that work to help the most impoverished communities. That way, it's not just blacks, but it's the poor communities. And we take that money and we create the African village here in the United States. Land trusts, the Freedmen's Bank, which can loan money at affordable interest rates, not just to blacks, but even to whites, to put their kids to school for home mortgages, right? So all I'm saying is that I think there's going to come a moment when we have some critical mass of white support. We have some critical. I want to address that question. I'll leave it out. We have some critical support from whites. I think we're going to have that very soon, right? But the question is, how do we get them to support not just universal programs that will help black people, but won't help us nearly as much as they help white people? How do we get them to support a program where black people can finally carve out some of this country for ourselves? And I think that's the question. I think reparations is something we should talk about as well as single payer health care and these other things. I think we call it the basic income grants, or something we should talk about, and all these things that support the entire working class. But also, I think we should fight out. We should use that, leverage that. I talk about this in the book. Leverage that to tear out some of this country for ourselves, right? Or not tear out, that's a bad word, but to control some of this country for ourselves. But one of your guests just talked about cash reparations. Is it? It's not. And I'm gonna tell you why. Cash is debt, right? It's you don't have to be a Marxist, as I am not technically. You don't have to be a Marxist to understand cash is just debt. If we don't own the means of production, so you go buy yourself a house, where's your money going? When you buy that house, you're just paying it to a bank that's owned. It's going to go outside your community. It's a pass through, right? If you look at, I'm not even going to respond to that one. If you look at, for instance, I think there's one of the first cities that had a reparations program was in Evanston, Illinois, right outside Chicago. And that money, which basically is a down payment on a house, or to make some improvements on the house, that's just a pass through. That money is not building wealth. We need wealth, not money. And the cash payment is just a really bad idea. Because what you're going to see if we do just get cash payments, you're going to see all these new taxes. You're going to see the price of everything's going to go up because it's going to drive inflation up, which is basically just, the owners of wealth decided that they can charge more. And so we might be in worse shape than we are now, which is hard to imagine, but it's very possible. We need to own the assets, homes in our communities that are in land trust, they're deeded for 100 years, whatever, and you have to live there, right? To rent that house, right? People can't own them; they're owned by the community. We need to think about things like worker co-ops. That's something we need to think about funding. What if we had worker co-ops, for instance, during the COVID pandemic? People talk about shortages of things like baby formula. What if we built a worker co-op that produced baby formula, healthy? Whatever we do, we're going to do it well. So what if we produce that baby formula, right? What if Boeing is producing planes that fall out of the sky? What if the Black community in the South Side of Chicago and Detroit, where you've got all this industrial space that's not being used, what if they produce a passenger airplanes, right, that are safe and that are cheaper? So I just think there's a lot of things we need to think about, and we need to think outside the box, which is the point of the book. We've always thought outside the box, and that's why we're targeted by the oligarchs in the society.
Obviously, it has not been a consensus, because we up here talking about it. It shouldn't just be cash payments, and many people within the reparations movement know that it should not simply be cash. Cash is one form of reparations, but cash will never make us whole. And you cannot put a dollar amount on what African people have been through in this country.
No, it's no question. No
Never
question.
about
question.
only a check. Never.
This country is organized around Black suffering. I think that's the point I hope I made in the book. Maybe I did. People can be the judge of it. But that's really the point. It's organized around Black suffering as opposed to prosperity for the people. Why do the workers of this country do 100% of the work and only get 42% of the wages? I mean, that makes absolutely no sense.
Now, it was something I was going to ask you. I got.
You think about that nap, though.
I'm not thinking about the nap. Yeah. Okay. This is what I thought. Yeah, it's one of the commenters. He sounds like a ADOS FBA person who is not really welcome up in this space. Hopefully, they're gonna act right and not have to get wished into the cornfield.
Yeah, ADOS is very problematic. ADOS is very problematic.
Yeah, we don't
we don't even mention them here.
There was somebody who asked a question, and I can't find it now. But yes, that's. Are you just now showing up? Got to start from the beginning, bruh. We've been here almost 2 hours, and you just now getting. All right, I ain't gonna talk about you that bad. Somebody had asked a question about the indigenous. I may have missed it, but where? Oh, there it is. I may have missed it, but where do indigenous fit into this? Where do they fit in terms of reparations? If that's what you're asking, you more than 2 hours late. You like months and years late on that one. But anyway,
I would like to answer that very quickly. Who is the brother? Good older brother out in North Carolina, who's kind of the father of the reparations movement. The scholar. What's his name?
Okay, say that again.
The brother who's out in North Carolina who writes and talks a lot about reparations. He's a good brother. He was with the ADOS people for a while, but he's not with them.
You talking about Darity?
Yeah, Darity. Yes, who I respect. I think he's well-meaning. I don't agree with his idea that it should be a cash payment. But one thing I do agree with, he says that our reparations plan for Black people should not exclude any other group, and particularly I think he's mentioned them by name, particularly the indigenous population, which is as deserving of reparations as anyone, right? And so they have to make their own plan, But if they want to borrow, if they want to duplicate what we do, I think that's fine. I think we should help them because that's
an age old. That never mind. Go ahead.
No, I just think we should.
The Japanese pursued reparations for the Japanese. The Jews were either pursuing or were given reparations as Jewish people. Mm-hmm. Whenever Black people raise up things, and we usually, like you said, raise up things that are universal. But I guess because people are used to us being enslaved and working for everybody else. Well, what about the Native American? The Native American have their own claim.
Yeah. Right.
Which we support.
Right.
Now, this is only if that's what you were asking.
Yeah, you're right though. You're right. They should have their own reparations program, and we should support that. But we need to get ours first because again, it's organized, and maybe that's just because of the genocide against the Native Americans. They killed all of them, right? But
there's some.
They killed most of them. But they
tried. They absolutely tried.
Yeah. It's our suffering that this country is organized around, which is not to diminish the suffering of the Native Americans. It's just that's the fundamental question.
Mhm. So I'm through with my notes. Oh, hold on. See here. I was asking about carve outs. We are asking for, okay, when it's their land first is all. Okay, got you. You know, the provisional government of the Republic of New Africa, which believes that the 5 states, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, that they have identified that should be the Black nation or the physical geographical Black nation in North America. In 1968, when they came up with that, they put forth that that should be part of the reparations demand, that it's not just cash, it should be land, and actually our own land or our own nation should be as reparations. From that beginning, the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, which sees itself as the government of the Black nation, those workers, those quote unquote leaders, have always been in discussions with Native American people on this land about, can we stay here? This is what we see. This is what we believe. This is how we see it, how we feel about it. Do we have permission? Do we have your permission to stay here? Because we came here with no blood on our hands. And there are documents from leaders in AIM and other indigenous organizations, letters written to the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, where they say, as long as you're going to be caretakers of the land and not exploit, yes, you are welcome to stay here. You have permission to stay here. And of course, we struggle together so that Native Americans get their sovereignty back all over the United States,
Right.
the reservation areas.
Yeah.
And they struggle with us to liberate New Africa. Because the bottom line is, whether you're talking about going back to Africa, whether you're talking about an Aslan, the southwest of the United States, whether you're talking about New Africa, nothing is going to be free until United States imperialism is destroyed.
I could not agree more.
No, you will not be free nowhere.
Right.
You're not going to be free once you go back to Africa.
Right.
You're not even going to free Africa
unless
you destroy United States imperialism.
Right. Settler colonialism is the scourge. Yeah,
part of how you do
we have to defeat.
Is through the support of the various liberation struggles.
Yeah.
The breaking up of the empire.
Yes. And I wouldn't do it the way that they suggest, where we just live in a few states. And the main reason I wouldn't do it that way is because I think people need to understand, having Black people all in one place in this land of madmen, it can be very dangerous, right? So, and I'm very serious about that. I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, you look back at what happened at Move in Philadelphia in 1985. Those people ain't gone, or that way of thinking. So that would be my. But otherwise, I agree with them. We need to be working in concert, particularly with the indigenous population. I think also, Blacks even in the Caribbean and in Africa, we should be working even in concert with them. I'll just give you one quick example. Like, I think if we talk about reparations where we have our own, we restore the Freedmen's Bank and we try to economically develop, I think a smart move would be to invest in computer technology, most of which the hard resources for the mineral resources that make this computer technology come from the Congo. And what if we had laptops made by the Congolese and sold to our Black worker cooperative, a Black-owned Apple, if you would, or Microsoft, whatever you want. What if we had that? It's going to be lower price because we're not going to exploit our African brothers as much. We're going to pay them a decent wage or a decent price for their computers, but it's probably going to be less than what we pay for the computers you buy at Best Buy, and we sell those to the entire country, to the entire world. I mean, these are the kind of things that really help, I think, would help to create the new man and the new woman that Fanon described that we need, to pull off this Renaissance, right? This African Renaissance. That's what we're really talking about, right? And what role can the diaspora in America, in the United States, play in it? That's really what we're talking about here.
I've been speaking with, see there, my voice is going. I've been speaking with Jon Jeter, author, journalist, muckraker, colleague, comrade, brother, friend, all that good stuff. The voice is going. We've been here 2 hours, which is good. Only scratch the surface. Only scratch the surface. We don't have to. I'm gonna talk to you about this after we go off live. We're gonna have to do. We have to figure something else out.
I'd be happy to. I'd be
You
happy.
got to have you back.
Every conversation with you is a good one, so I'd be happy to.
So again, folks, that's Jon Jeter, Jon, not John, JonJeter.com. Latest book, Class War in America, How the Elites Divide the Nation by Asking, are you a worker or are you white? If you have not bought the book, buy the book. Buy the book because I said buy the book, because you heard what John said, not because David Silberg in the chat said to buy the book. Yes, I'm singling you out, David, one of our BLM chat members. But no, seriously though, support John, support his journalism for the people. This book is now published through your own company called Drum Publishing, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Yes.
Support independent media such as Black Liberation Media. Support the Patreon. Support Rootwork. Please go to my Rootwork channel on YouTube and subscribe, as well as subscribing to Black Liberation Media. Hit the Cash App, hit the Venmo, hit the Patreon, hit wherever you need to hit to buy Jon Jeter's newest book. Megan said she was new. So please get the book, Megan. Thank you so much for showing up.
Thank you, Megan.
All for showing up on Turkey Day. Let's see, 5 o'clock. I think there's a game going on right now.
Yeah, of course.
Some folks should be eating now. They're gonna get the itis at some point.
Right,
I already have the itis. I ain't even eating it. So I'm gonna go get my adult nap on.
And if I can, Tandy, just very quickly, people who don't want to deal with Amazon, and I certainly understand that, you can go to your local bookstore and order it for you. I think it might take a few days, but they can order the book for you. So if you don't want to deal with Amazon, it is available to your bookstore who can order it for you.
Wait a minute, hold on. What the? Judy pulled a mac and cheese.
Time to go.
It's time to go. It's time to go. The mac and cheese done came out. All right, John. So yeah, don't leave. But we're gonna get up out of here though, and let the Black Liberation Media audience. Thank you for tuning in wherever you tune in. Again, like, subscribe, share. If you didn't like in the beginning when I asked you to, please like now. Please subscribe. Please share the link. For those who weren't here watching live, they can come back and watch it later. So that's it for now. Y'all enjoy the rest of your day, and we're gonna get up out of here. All right. Peace.